Good morning, students. Welcome for today's session. Today, first session will be taken by Dr. M.C Tayade, professor in physiology, and title of his session is Early Clinical Exposure. He has previously taken session on ATCOM, Attitude, Ethics and Communication, and I told you last time his book on textbook of bioethics is on Amazon. 1 lakh copies have been sold out and cost is just 200 rupees. So now you are at home, you can get the book online through Amazon and start reading. And this is one more new concept under competency based medical education, that is early clinical exposure. Now previous batches, they were exposed to clinical medicine from second year. In first MBBS, they did not have any exposure to clinical medicine. But for CBMA batch, for your batch, right from the first MBBS, you will be exposed to clinical scenarios, patients and wards. Dr. Tayade has also written a book on early clinical exposure, and which will be published in first week of February. And by that time he is also completing his PhD on the same topic, that is early clinical exposure. So today's sessions will be taken by Dr. Tayade. So over to Dr. Tayade.
Good morning, students. Today in this foundation course we are going to discuss this new concept that is known as early clinical exposure. Basically, what is early clinical exposure? That is the exposure of medical students in previous traditional pattern that was from second MBBS. But as per the new course CBME, that is competency based medical education, where this EC or the exposure to the medical students is done from the first day of their medical entrant in medical education. This is the second batch that is going to face this new curriculum, that is CISP. Here the foundation course is going to intervene from your first day, and from your first day, from your first month, the CISP, as a part of CISP, the foundation course is included in your course. Along with this, in foundation course they have put a very important area, the new interventions that you are going to be introduced, that is EC, that is early clinical exposure. Your ward visits, your different interventions are introduced in this new course, that you should know about it in more detail. When we see the details about early clinical exposure, today from my session I'll try to explain you what is the basic concept of EC, what is the framework of syllabus of EC, EC utility, importance of EC, and CISP interventions. That is, you should know the terms CISP, that is competency based medical education, that is CBME. The early clinical exposure is a teaching learning methodology basically, which fosters exposure of medical students to the patients as early as the first year of medical college. Now in simple term, you are just newly entered students from the 12th into the MBBS curricula. Early clinical exposure, in simple terms, exposure of medical students from the first day of their medical college entry, that is ECE. Now ECE is one form of vertical integration pattern between the preclinical subjects and clinical subjects. I'll just explain this fact with you initially. Basically, When we see the pattern of medical education, it is a 4.5 year course with 1 year internship. Now in this 4.5 years, that is divided into first year, second year and final year. First year is, we call it as preclinical years, second year as paraclinical years and final year as a clinical years. In first year, there are three subjects: anatomy, physiology and biochemistry. These are preclinical subjects. Here we conduct or we learn the basic aspects of clinical, that is called as preclinical. In para, associated facts of clinical, and clinical, that is proper patient interaction. Now this is one pattern. Now initially these subjects were taught in a different compartments, that is from first year we learn only three subjects, in second year we learn independently other subjects, and in final year we learn independently different subjects. Now with this, when we see nowadays the pattern is changed, and as per the international standard, now we are connecting these subjects from first year to last year in an integration. That is two kinds of intervention. One is horizontal intervention and another one is vertical intervention. Now in this vertical integration, we connect the preclinical with the clinical era. That means in a very simple way, we learn clinical parts from the first day of our course. Now this is one form, that means the ECE is one form of vertical integration pattern between the preclinical subjects and clinical subjects. When you are entered in our college or in syllabus of MBBS, you should know what is ECE, that is early clinical exposure. That means you have to face the clinical from the first year of your education. That makes your education more interesting. Now when we see the CBME intervention, either ATCOM, that is new part is introduced to you, EC, integrated teaching, ethics and foundation course. These are the five main major areas that are introduced to you, and that is very great thing to you that you are learning this modern syllabus with modern interventions. Now this is my book, that is textbook of early clinical exposure. In this book I explain the basic setting and planning of EC. That means how the EC is implemented in medical education, how and what is the requirement of this EC implementation, and exactly what to learn and how to learn the ECE, that is clinical exposure, so that our clinical journey become interesting and will become a competent doctor. Now the next question I highlighted in this book is, what is the need of ECE? I'll just tell the other facts along with this discussion. Now we'll see the ECE as an educational model has been adopted by many medical colleges, universities across the world to bridge the gap between the clinical, that is between the early theoretical years and clinical postings of final year in our undergraduate medical education. Now in this session we are going to discuss two major components. In this session I want to explain what is basic facts related to the EC, that is number one, and secondly what is the syllabus, how this EC is implemented in our curriculum, and how we are going to be implement in or at our university in this first year of MBBS. Now when we see the history, in 2019, that is in last year, the Medical Council of India introduced this CBME pattern in India. Your batch is the second batch that is facing this CBME pattern. The last year's batch was the historical first batch that introduced this CBME pattern. But due to the COVID and such emergency situation, that pattern could not be implemented successfully, or due to some reason that was not possible to be implemented in a proper way. But this is the first batch, that is 2020 batch. From this batch, the new committee or new council, that is NMC, is going to be introduced this in sincere and in a proper way what the earlier council introduced to you, this CBME pattern. The students, you are very lucky that this pattern is going to be implemented. As a new entrant, this pattern is helpful to you to become a competent, in your society, to become a competent as a best doctor, to become competent as excellent international professional faculty, because most of the concepts that they has introduced in the CBME pattern in India are taken the basic advanced that concept that already introduced in other countries. The practices of the EC, when we see in the history, are already adapted from around before 2000. When we see the slight historical part, in 2011, for the first time, the MCI think to introduce this ECE in our curricula. And from that efforts, nowadays the 2020 batch is introduced with EC that the MCI dream at that time. Now this competency based medical education provides an effective outcome based pattern in today's medical education with specific mention competencies, learning objectives and revised assessment tools. That means they have not introduced only the EC or ATCOM, but for every subject they introduce mention specific competencies in anatomy, in physiology, in biochemistry. All the syllabus is now mentioned, is now listed with you with mentioning proper competencies, proper learning objectives and revised assessment tool. Basically what we learn, we have different mottos or objectives. One is I has to clear my score, that is my examination. That is most important to me. And here the CBME also intervene in assessment pattern of MBBS. In foundation course, we also explain you how the assessment pattern is revised by the other speakers. You should aware about this. When we will be introduced, when we will be attending the college as regularly, in a regular way, that will explain you this basic revised changing pattern in assessment tool. Here today, EC implementation is one of the most important suggestion in CBME curriculum. EC implementation is one of the most important suggestion in CBME curriculum. MCI suggested EC sessions to be implemented from foundation course with due importance. MCI has recommended dedicated 40 hours training in foundation course. Now students, this training is conducted in the duration of 40 hours in this foundation course. However, due to this online mode, we are just going to introduce only few sessions with you so that you are going to be understand what is EC. Now in my next subsequent session, I will explain you how this EC is going to be implemented in different phase wise at our institute. Now from regular teaching, MCI has recommended dedicated 90 hours of training in first MBBS with equally involved of all three departments of the preclinical. That means when we see the pattern of implementation of EC in your syllabus as per the NMC, in foundation course NMC introduced some dedicated hours, dedicated session to explain the students what is EC, basic concepts of EC and basic understanding of EC. Afterwards, when you are starting or attending the classes from the first day in your first year MBBS, there the MCI or NMC introduce you 90 hours training in first year. Now this 90 hours training, that is divided into three subjects, that is for anatomy, for physiology and for biochemistry equally 30 hours. That means you are going to face 30 hours for ECE anatomy, 30 hours ECE physiology, and 30 hours ECE biochemistry. That is 1, 2, and 3. Thus, your training will be conducted for 90 hours. In our university, we introduce a logbook to you. That logbook will be received to you when you are attending your regular training sessions. You have to fill the details what are going to be conducted in your particular session. Now in this each 30 hours for each department. This 30 hours we just made a session of 2 hours for each module. Thus we are going to be introducing 15 modules for each subjects. And there are 15 exercises to each subjects in your logbook. That is as per the recommendation of NMC. Now as per this recommendation, where these are going to be intervened to you. That means each department should fix 30 teaching hours in calendar year of first year. With this intention, my textbook is prepared. On this basis of pattern, I prepared this textbook, that is the textbook of early clinical exposure written by me. Now this will helpful for you as well as for faculty for the smooth conducting of early clinical exposure. Students, I write this book with this concept that is stated by NMC. In my book, I made 3 divisions, one for anatomy, one for physiology, and one for biochemistry, with all detailed syllabus, how this EC will be conducting in a proper way. That I put out all the points, all the required information, so that you will understand the EC in a smoother way. Now you understand what is early clinical exposure. You understand it is a teaching learning methodology which fosters exposure of the medical students to the patients as early as the first year of your medical education. Early, clinical, and exposure. There are 3 terms. Early, what would have traditionally been regarded as the preclinical phase, usually the first year. That is early. Clinical, and exposure, authentic human contact in a social or clinical context that enhances learning of the health, illness, and or disease, and the role of the health professional. When we see this detail, that is exposure. Now here we are going to introduce, expose to you EC at different 3 phases or different 3 ways. One is hospital based EC setting, second one classroom setting, and third one community setting. First, when we see the hospital based EC settings, here we are planned different clinical visits to different departments: medicine, surgery, OPD, different OPDs, casualty, then at different wards in our hospitals. That is the first division, that is hospital based EC sessions. Anatomy department will introduce the basic anatomy with correlation with the applied aspects, basically associated with radiology, surgery, and orthopedics, so that the base of the radiology, surgery, and orthopedics in anatomy viewpoint of view will be cleared by the anatomy department using hospital based EC sessions. In physiology, the different visits are arranged in medicine and in surgery departments, so that your part of clinical examination in our physiology will be completed as per the CBME pattern. And in biochemistry, different visits are arranged to different labs in our hospitals, so that that parts will be covered under hospital-based EC sessions. Secondly, there is the classroom settings. In classroom settings, in classroom, we are going to introduce the ECA with different material, that is different case scenarios, proper case, videos, different clinical materials, lab reports, so that we can explain, so that we can learn the your subjects anatomy, physiology and biochemistry with clinical touch, that is classroom based EC sessions. And thirdly, in biochemistry, they are using different materials like lab reports, case scenarios, so that we will get the basic foundation of biochemistry in clinical context. Hence, our basic in anatomy, physiology and biochemistry will be clear with clinical context. That is known as EC settings. That means you understand there are three EC settings: hospital based EC setting, classroom based EC setting, and the third one community based EC setting. Now what is done in community based EC setting? That our community medicine department arranged community visits to you, and in that different community visits this third part is completed. That means in concluding, you understand there are three kinds of EC settings: hospital based, classroom based and community based. These are the three kinds of settings. Now when we proceed further, this is the picture showing you preclinical disciplines and clinical disciplines. Here EC is a bridge. Here EC is the bridge that connects preclinical discipline with clinical context or clinical disciplines. EC works as a bridging gap between the preclinical years and clinical discipline posting, so that your foundation or base of clinical subject is become proper competent from the first year. Now this CBME or CISP has suggested implementation of early clinical exposure for you from your foundation course. It pointed out that the start of clinical training in the first year with communication and basic patient examination skill and professionalism. The other speakers has already introduced you this professionalism, basic patient examinations, etc. Here the early clinical exposure and this accompanying knowledge and skills development does not replace the basic and clinical sciences, but rather enriches and conceptualizes that learning and offer a wide variety of teaching and learning method. That means student, EC is not a new concept. EC though is a new concept in syllabus, but it never replaces our regular basic and clinical knowledge. EC is just helpful supporting tool that enriches us, conceptualizes us, our learning to understand this anatomy, this physiology, this biochemistry in a more interesting fashion. That when we take the feedback of last year students, EC is found to be the best interesting part, because this is my personal experience as part of my PhD. I was working on this area since last 7 years. In that last 7 years, when we conducted different visits, different modules of EC, that we found the students are most happy or interested in EC sessions, because from first day when we come as in medical era, everyone want to become just wear an apron and to be visits the clinics directly. Actually this EC supports you, improves your attitude towards interest in clinical area, with understanding the knowledge, importance of the knowledge of the basic preclinical. Why I am learning anatomy, physiology and biochemistry, what are their importance to be in my clinical practice, because nowadays everyone's focus is towards clinical. When you are focused towards clinical and you want to be practiced clinical in the community, either as a medicine, surgical, pediatrics, in any way, you should know the basic foundation, basic knowledge of anatomy, physiology as well as biochemistry. Now EC makes you this integration, EC frame you this integration. Now once we understand the importance of EC in this way, EC has potential to lay its impact on all learning domains. What I am going to learn, knowledge, improve my skills and improving my attitude with communication skills and ethics. That is the importance of EC. EC is one of the important area intervention in this medical teaching. Now when we see the purpose for early clinical exposure in the first year MBBS, to learn the basic clinical skills by students, enhance motivation, prepare towards the purpose for which the students are entered in medical profession, enable students to correlate what they are learning in basic sciences by learning basic clinical skills, observing relevant disease abnormalities, encourage students to learn the professional behavior of a doctor by observing, and provide the context for application of their learning in practice. That is, there are a number of purpose objectives of NMC or international community to be introduced you with the clinical, to be introduced a clinical from the first day, that is early clinical exposure. That means when we are completing this course with the intervention of EC, you learn the clinical skills, you will be motivated towards clinical area, you will be prepared toward the purpose with which intention we introduce in this profession. We will observing the relevant disease abnormalities during your first year sessions. You will be learn the professional behavior, that is very important, because the student basically in the CBME and traditional pattern, when we compare the two pattern, that is the traditional and CBME pattern, one of the basic difference is in traditional pattern there was a very less emphasis on attitude focused education, and in CBME there is more towards the attitude focused education. That is the basic difference between these two patterns. That is the traditional pattern that was earlier implemented in India before 2019, and after 2019 that is the CBME pattern. You should know these terms. You should know few terms like CBME, that is competency based medical education, ECE early clinical exposure, ATCOM, that is AATCOM, that is ATCOM, that is attitude, ethics and communication module. And you should know the integration. You should know the integration in two parts, vertical integration and horizontal integration. And lastly, you should know the SDL, that is self-directed learning. That is also one part that will be introduced to you in subsequent session, that is SDL, self-directed learning. These are the 5 concepts you should know, because we are going to be learn these in with the help of these 5 tools that are introduced in CBME. These are the nothing but new subjects, but these are the new tools that they introduce to become your journey smoother. Hence I request you, just learn this part, just read this part with emphasis, so that you will become a competent to understand other areas of CBME, your syllabus and your preclinical subjects, that is anatomy, physiology and biochemistry. That is the importance or purpose of implementation of EC in our first year MBBS. Now when we see the framework, actually student, this is not part related to you, but you should know how the EC is going to be implemented shortly, how the module is framed that is framework of ECE. Because we are facing this, so you should know what is the framework or module of ECE. I'll just explain you in a simple way in front of you. Actually, I prepare this slide for my faculties for my workshop in CBMA. Now here how this ECE is going to be implemented. First you understand there are three settings. You should know the first term setting. There are basically three kinds of setting that I earlier tell you, that are classroom setting, hospital setting and community setting. These are the three kinds of setting. One, classroom setting, hospital setting and community setting. Any module that is going to be introduced in your regular course will be under this setting. Setting means where your this session, this class is going to be conducted. This class to be conducted either in our regular classroom or in hospital or in community. These are the 3 points, 1, 2 and 3. You understand this setting. Now there is another term, that is module. Module is the what are going to introduce in that particular session or in that class. Suppose today you are going to learn the measurement of blood pressure. The module title is measurement of blood pressure. That is the module title. Setting, I will conduct my students this module or this blood pressure measurement in my classroom. That is classroom setting. Now after classroom setting, my next session will be I will introduce my students to measurement of blood pressure over the patients. That is setting is now hospital setting. Now in third, I will introduce the same in community. I will just visit with the help of community medicine department, and the department is arrange a visit in community. That time in that form I will ask the student to measure the blood pressure. That is community setting. Thus there are three settings that he has to face, but all these three settings at different level you understand how to measure the blood pressure, that in classroom setting. What is the importance of measurement of blood pressure? What are the different variations in patients? That is hospital setting. And what I found in community, that is community setting. Now these sessions are arranged with target audience. Here target audience is considered obviously the first MBBS students. Third, there is a number of batches or students in each batch. Obviously we arrange the session in smaller batches. Your batch is of 200 students. We arrange the session in batch of 50, and 50 batches further subdivided into 25 each. Competency. At each module we place particular competency. That is each module or each session we are going to introduce. To each session we label one competency that is in our syllabus. Then we put the objectives. What are the objectives? What are the things I am going to be learn in that particular module? Then with the content. We complete this module with the help of a content, either a case, either reports, lab reports, procedures, clinical visits and different kinds of interventions. The content that is available as per the requirement of my module. That is the content. Then TL methods. How we are going to learn this with the help of module. That is bedside clinic, case discussion in clinics, case discussion in classroom, community visits, etc. That are called as TL methods. And outcome, that we are going to ask you to write this in your notebook, logbook. That is a record. Then we ask you the assessment of the outcome. The assessment of the outcome is done in view of all domains. That knowledge, that is checked with the help of simple tests like MCQs. Skill, for the skill we introduce the OSCE, that is observation structured practical examination. And for attitude we just ask to fill you the different questionnaires. That is using different assessment tool with the help of three different domains in view of all domains, that is knowledge domain, skill domain and attitude domain. These different skills, different domains are assessed, and then afterwards we ask you to record all the observation in your logbook with proper sign by the corresponding teacher. This is the basic framework of implementation of ECE in first year MBBS. I hope in this session you understand this framework in a proper way, so that when you will introduce the ECE module, you are already aware different terms. What are setting, what is module, what is competency, objectives, content, TL method, outcome, assessment of outcome, and record. That is the proper framework of implementation of ECE. Now the next question is where to use the ECE. There are two terms they have put in this PPT slide. One is context, one is relevance. One is context, one is relevance. Here we put three settings. One in center, one classroom setting, another one hospital setting, and third one that is a community setting. Now this community setting are completed with the help of community visits. Hospital setting, hospital visits, primary care exposure, and classroom setting, training in basic clinical skills, a demonstration of different clinical problems or concepts in classroom. We also conduct the case discussion. Either we brought the patient to the classroom, or we help, or with the take the help of patient records during classroom setting. That is a content in different setting, that is classroom, hospital based, and community setting. Now once you understand, you are going to be introduced these different settings in your regular pattern. You are now aware. I just conclude this as a first part here. Today you learn what is EC, that is early clinical exposure. That means he has to expose to the clinical surrounding from the first year. That is the interesting part. Otherwise, in traditional way, in before 2019, the medical students will learn just in classroom as a like 12 science throughout a year. But now we are interestingly completing some of our part, some of our syllabus in EC pattern in different settings. That is, we learn some facts of our syllabus in classroom, some in hospital setting, and some in community setting, so that your learning will become interesting. Now you learn today what is EC, what are different EC setting, what are the objectives of this EC implementation, why there is found a need of EC implementation, and what are the importance of EC in our regular teaching. Then you understand the basic framework, how this EC is going to be implemented, what are the dedicated hours for the EC in first year MBBS. With this, we are going to be see in the subsequent part of this session about EC in different settings, how this new technology or this new intervention introduced to you your regular teaching in different settings. For example, EC in classroom settings. In physiology, we are using X-rays, lab reports, ECG, EEGs to you to explain our regular course in physiology. Now, in anatomy, they are going to introduce X-rays, USG reports, lab reports. In biochemistry, they are going to introduce lab reports and other clinical material that are helpful to you to understand clinical biochemistry. In anatomy, they are explaining you the basic structure of bone, different clinical aspects of the bone like fracture, abnormality, different kind of abnormality, congenital abnormality, with the help of X-rays and different radiological measures in different EC setting, but in your classroom. In physiology, in classroom, we are show you what is ECG, what is EEG, what is EMG, how the ECG is recorded in demonstration. We ask you to read this ECG. Now this ECG is recorded and ask you to record, ask you to interpret, ask you to explain different kind of waves, that is P waves, QRS complex, T waves, etc. And in biochemistry, different lab reports are used to explain you different concepts associated with the clinical view. That is the EC in classroom setting is to be implemented in our university. Now, once we understand this in classroom setting, that is majorly we are going to introduce. In our regular classes, we are going to be introduce this part with you. Now the question is, what is the purpose of all this setting and modules? Basically, the setting and module of EC are prepared to learn basic clinical skills. To learn basic clinical skills. He has to learn basic clinical skills with the different interventions in different setting. Enhance the motivation and prepare students towards the purpose for which they entered in this medical profession. That is the first keyword I found, learn basic clinical skill. Second keyword I found, motivation. Third keyword I found, correlation. I'll just correlate the knowledge of basic sciences with the clinical context, with the clinical way. I get the keyword professional behavior. I will learn the professional behavior through different settings of EC in indirect or indirect ways, that is professional behavior, improving attitude, and provide a context for the application of our learning in practice. That is, these are the some objectives or purpose of EC, that is motivation, knowledge correlation, professional behavior, context, and learn basic clinical skill that are required in my clinical practice, so that will helpful to me to be a competent as a skilled person in my clinical practice. Now, what are the implications? There are different ways of looking at same situation. Students may observe everything superficially or look at totally unintended things. And observation is not a neutral. That is important implication of EC. Observation is always a selective and it needs a chosen object, a definitive task, an interest, a point of view, and a problem. Now, when there are different visits are arranged in different settings, either classroom, hospital, and community, your most important objectives that I want to highlight your own spectrum of observation, because observation based learning is always a good retention in a longer way rather than just reading. Hence, students, when we are in different settings, in different levels, you should observe, and very purposefully we ask the student to observe, to note this observation in your logbook independently rather than framing a particular things. Like in our regular laboratory books, we put some questions, question number 1, 2, 3, 4, and he has to mention answer the same in only in that way. Like what is the normal range of hemoglobin? What are the different ways of measurement of hemoglobin? He has to put the same thing. But here is the basic difference in this regular logbook and in EC logbook, where we put very free spectrum of observation, what the student should write, what they observe only, who, what, and how, and for what. You just think your visits. Suppose you visit to the medicine ward. What we observe? First, what are the objectives of that medicine ward visit? What I observe, how I observe, and for what I observe should be right independently in your logbook, and complete that logbook in proper way with the help of spectrum of your own observation. That is one uniqueness of the filling EC logbooks from other logbooks. Then I hope today you understand this spectrum of observation, that is how to fill the logbook toward the end. With these students, You understand today in my first session basic concept of EC. Now in subsequent next session after break I will explain you the different areas of EC, different modules of EC in subject wise, so that you will become aware how these EC are implementing in CBME pattern in our different subjects. I will explain you how they are introduced in anatomy, in physiology and in biochemistry at our university. I hope you understand in this first session of my first 45 minutes that explain you the basic framework of EC. In that I conclude the objective to explain you what is EC, what are EC settings, what is EC module, what are different settings are arranged, their hour-wise arrangement in your regular timetable, how these visits will be arranged in our university, what are the syllabus is going to be introduced in our CBME pattern, what is the need of these EC settings, how we are going to be assess this, how to be write this in your logbook. With these students I conclude this first session, and after a break of 15 minutes, now there is a time of 10:45. I'll just take a break of 15 minutes and exactly at 11 we'll join to be as a second part of EC, and in this second part we are going to be learn in detail how EC is going to be implemented in your regular first year MBBS curricula. Now students, with this I stop it at here, and after a break of 15 minutes we'll meet at exactly 11. Thank you students. Once again, good morning students. Now in this second session of EC, that is early clinical exposure, I will introduce you different interventions by which we are going to learn our regular teaching, our regular syllabus with the help of these ECE interventions. ECE, that is early clinical exposure. In my morning's first session, you understand what is EC, what are different settings of EC, what are different modules of EC, what is the importance of EC, what is the purpose and objectives of EC, and what is the utility of EC, and last, what is and why EC is introduced as one of the most important parameter in this CBME pattern. Now in this session, in second part, we will going to discuss details about EC, how different interventions are helpful in EC. Basically students, in EC at first year in our university, as per the CBME, as per the NMC, were planned each 15 sessions for each department. For anatomy 15 sessions, for physiology 15 sessions, for biochemistry 15 sessions, that is total 45 sessions each for 2, so that your 90 hours will be completed. That is number 1, you understand. Number 2, each session's conclusions, observations that I earlier mentioned, you have to note down in your logbook. This logbook will be given to you from the first week from your regular teaching, and from first week of regular teaching we have arranged, implemented different settings of EC in your regular weekly timetable. At your weekly timetable, one slot is put for one session. These slots will be starting from the second or third week from our regular teaching. Now you understand, in weekly timetable there will be one session that is highlighted as ECE, that is put for this. We are arranging these sessions as per the conveniency of students and our regular schedule of the teaching. We has put the settings, different settings as per the harmony or the need of the topic. Now, initially there are ward visits, OPD visits, community visits, but COVID we are going to be planned these different visits with proper social distancing and with proper precautions or care required in this emergency. Initially there will be used some classroom settings maybe at higher numbers. Now in classroom setting will give you case scenario, case reports, lab reports, patient reports and different kind of material, clinical material. We'll also introduce you different clinical measurements, clinical methods, clinical examinations, etc. Thirdly, we'll mention you different clinical investigations like ECG, EEG, EMG, X-rays, etc. in different departments, that is anatomy, physiology and biochemistry. That is a learning way or learning interventions of EC. Afterwards, students, in EC, one is very important, that is the role of cases of EC learning. Now the case taking or history taking of your particular patient or history taking of the patient with your proper clinical knowledge, that is very important in clinical context. That time when you interact with your patient, how you interact, how you should interact and what kind of interact you should with your patient should be known to you from the first year. Now in first year, particularly in physiology, there are given a separate module in regular practical examinations. In practical, in physiology, there are 4 kinds of divisions. First, human physiology, clinical physiology, hematology and experimental physiology. These are the 4 entities. From first day, we are going to start the hematology and experimental physiology. And in second term, there are clinical physiology and human physiology. Clinical physiology and human physiology has more integration. We made the more integrated way, different chapters, different practicals with EC blended. While in first term, there are from first day, there are introduced hematology division and experimental division, that is experimental physiology and hematology. In hematology, there are a number of practicals related to the blood investigations. In that we put visit, that is blood bank visit, and visit to wards and OPD. These 2 modules are introduced here in first. Along with third module, we introduce in classroom setting is the reading different lab reports and different lab reports interpretation with your first year clinical knowledge with exact clinical interpretation that is going to be important in your clinical practice. That is the intervention of EC that is put in physiology. In anatomy, there are different visits to the radiology department, to orthopedic departments that are going to be conducted from your first term. In radiology department visit, the anatomy teachers will explain you the different X-rays, how to read that X-ray, what are the important bony landmarks for that X-rays, how to find out the fracture and different clinical entities, clinical and abnormalities, etc. in anatomy. While in biochemistry, different lab reports, their clinical implications with different specific tests are to be introduced in biochemistry in the first term. With this intervention, now we are going to see one example, that is the role of cases in the EC. The role of cases in EC, because we are going to be introduced as a blended learning in EC platform. Here in EC, to understand the cases is very important. Cases provides a focus for learning, A case is a framework for discussion. Whenever we introduce any case scenario to you in theoretical way, that it is a framework for discussion so that we can implement our basic knowledge, basic sciences knowledge to understand that case, the importance of knowledge, bridging that knowledge to understand that this is process. Case is a well constructed case functions as a surrogate teacher. A case is not a textbook or syllabus. Very important, student. Case is not a textbook or syllabus. It is as a case record that exactly the patient when admitted in hospital and how he process his disease and his disease management, either direct management, investigations, diagnosis and management, so that towards the cure. That is, case is not a textbook or syllabus. There will be find different cases with different intervention, with different patterns, in different ways. We have to learn this, try to learn, implement our basic knowledge to this case based learning and use of case matches the goals and objectives of the curriculum. That is very important, that what we are going to be attain different cases, either we'll observe the case in the wards or observe the case in the classroom or just learn the case with our context. Suppose in there is a regular session of respiratory system in physiology. In that respiratory system, we'll just introduce one case, for example, COPD. In that COPD case, what are your observations? How we presented the case? That case provides us a focus for learning and framework and objectives of curriculum. For observation, task 1. I just explain you simply. You are sitting in an OPD, that is outpatient clinic, and have been told that the next patient to be seen, Mr. Jagan, a 24 years old man who has signs and symptoms of thyrotoxicosis. Your clinical teacher has asked you to observe. Now just what is the student being asked to observe? That is important. Actually, I prepare these slides for our faculty, but I am using the same slides almost to you, because so that you will understand this concept in technical point of view very clear. You should understand how the teacher or process is he different sessions with you. That time you should know what is the student being asked to observe, and this is applicable to all the cases or all case based modules. What is the students being asked to observe? What prior knowledge does he has? What might he learn from this observation? These are the very three important questions you should note from this presentation. Your teacher will explain all the facts, only he will just introduce the case to you, only what prior knowledge does student have. On that basis, when only after your completion of the respiratory system, then only we introduce you the case of COPD, case of asthma, or case of any kind of related to the respiratory disease. That time you should write there in your logbook what prior knowledge does you have, what is being asked to be observed to me. Suppose we introduce you the case of COPD and ask you to observe the clinical examination of COPD patient. That time you have to observe the clinical examination in different headings. You already know there are 4 kinds of clinical examination. Sorry, initially there are 2 kinds of clinical examination and there are 4 kinds of systemic examinations. In clinical examination, you ask you general examination. Because earlier in our regular syllabus, we explain you, we taught you, we explain you what is general examination of patient. Then only we ask you to note down what are different observations in that particular case of respiratory disease, because we already completed in our regular teaching respiratory system in theory classes. In practical classes, we completed clinical examination. In practical classes, we completed examination of respiratory system. Then only we'll put a visit of respiratory system case. That is a module of case. That time what prior knowledge does you has to be mentioned in your logbook in the first para. What the teacher asks you to observe. Suppose in that visit, the teacher asks you, students note down the points of general examination of this case. Then you note down the general examination of this case in second paragraph. What might the student learn from this observation? And this is very important point. You should note always toward the end of every session what you learn from this observation of EC session. Always. What you learn from this observation, you should mention in your own words as a single paragraph, either the half page or either the 4 lines. These are the 3 different objectives you should mention in your logbook for every case. Now, for example, I explain you the module of a case of asthma, and I ask you to note down the systemic examination of asthma patient. Now you have to note down what prior knowledge I have. We already completed the asthma or the basic physiology of respiratory system. Now teacher asked me to note down your observation as a systemic examinations under different headings. That is your inspection, palpation, percussion and auscultation. And toward the end, conclude this session with what you learn. That means you note down your prior knowledge, first keyword, your observation, second keyword, your task as a second keyword, and third, what you learn from this observation as a third keyword. That is the writing of the case in your session. Same is applicable to the all modules. Suppose there is a video case demonstration module. What he has to note down? What is the prior knowledge? Suppose there is a video of thyroid disorders. Clinical videos are put for 1 hour. You should note down what is your prior knowledge. You completed the endocrine theory. Then you note down what the teacher asks you to observe and what might you learn from this session toward the end. You just note down these parts. Now this is a way or pattern you have to note down in your logbooks. In this logbook, when you see carefully, we just put only the index and we just put a blank 45 pages to it for 45 modules. Each module has, we allotted 2 pages, so that there will be approximate 90 pages. Now you have to note down this every scenario, every module with the help of 3 parts. I am repeating this part so that you will understand this better. You just note down this slide. You have to note down your every logbook module with the help of these 3 questions, students. I can ask you to note down this. I will not wait for here. You just note down what is student being asked to observe. What prior knowledge does student have? What might he learn from these observations? And you just fill your regular notebook with the help of these 3 questions and complete and sign up from your teacher that explain you that corresponding session or conducted that corresponding session. Then why to use? It develop an understanding of how symptoms can explain by understanding the anatomy as well as physiological changes. That is meets intended learning outcome. Now, what is the importance to see the case of COPD, to see any clinical case like COPD, asthma, in respiratory, other cases, either CNS cases, CVS cases, etc., that develops an understanding in you how the symptoms can be explained by understanding, by underlaying our anatomical as well as physical changes, and move the student from knows to knows how. That means we should shift our knowledge base from knows only to knows how. That knows means what I knows in anatomy, what I knows in physiology in that case. That is the first part. And knows how the changes shifted from anatomy and physiologically towards the disease process. So that will create an interest. shifting of basic clinical concept towards the disease process will understand with the help when you observe your patient. When you observe the patient with your approach and your interaction with the patient will improve your attitude. One more point you should be note down in your logbook. I'll just be explaining in my subsequent slides. Now here we allow the students to correlate the anatomy and physiology with the signs and symptoms. Though the signs and symptoms is not the detailed parts that is teach or learn in first year MBBS. But here we allow the students to correlate our previous knowledge, our prior knowledge of anatomy and physiology with the signs and symptoms that I observe on that day in my patient. That will create an interest, that will motivate me to note down, to write down the clinical anatomy, clinical physiology. Here I have the field of utility of basic sciences in patient care. That is the second motto of these EC sessions. I have the field of utility of basic sciences in patient care, and I look at the person having the disease rather than the disease itself. That is very important. That means it motivates my attitude towards or having the disease rather than the disease itself. That is very important of the implication of EC. That means the implication of EC is more than only knowledge focus, but it is more towards skilled as attitude focus. EC not only improves your knowledge, but EC improves your attitude. That is very important, and this is the basic difference from the traditional pattern teaching and in EC pattern teaching. In our advanced CBME pattern with the help of exposure of early to the context to the clinical way, that is ECE, and that ECE helps to look at the patient having the disease rather than the disease itself. That is very important. Now the next question is, how can we use, can be used in a variety of ways. Two students observing the same aspects and comparing the notes. Students observing different aspects and sharing ideas. Students focusing on communication, data gathering, etc. And communication and differences in different patients. This is, when you read this slide, it looks like be complex. When we make it a simple, how can we use EC? It's very simple. It can be used in a different ways. By observations, by improving communications and focusing on communications and data collection, sharing our ideas, comparing the notes, comparing the different findings, and we can implement this and note down in our logbook. Now when we note down the observation guide, you have to fill it in detail. In this slide, I put you one example. Here the EC topic is visit to medicine ward of first MBBS student. That is EC topic. Learning objectives is, to the end of this visit, students should able to perform taking radial pulse. That is your objective today. Today he has to learn the how we will perform radial pulse. Now we put what we learn, that is cognitive domain. How you improve your skill, that is under psychomotor domain. What is your attitude, that is your affective domain, communication skills and ethical views. You have to fill this in under 5 years. Cognitive domain, psychomotor domain, affective domain, communication skills and ethical views. Now in simple way students, I just explain you this second part of notebook filling. Firstly, what do you observe? What was your prior knowledge? What you observed and what was the outcome? That were three entities we discussed to fill your logbook. Now what you learn toward the end of this session, the student should able to perform taking radial pulse was their objectives. Was these objectives was fulfilled? You just note down with the help of these three domains, that is cognitive domain, psychomotor domain, affective domain. On the basis of communication skills and ethical views, you just try to mention. There is no need to mention all the domains at all the times. Suppose today you learn to perform taking blood pressure. You just emphasize what I learned today. May I able to take the blood pressure? May I able to read the blood pressure? May I independently take the blood pressure of my patient? That you just explain it under psychomotor domain, affective domain, with more emphasis. That is the second part, that you learn to read, to note down the observations in your logbook. Now, in this second session, you understand how to fill the logbook, how to fill this logbook with different kinds, with a special emphasis. Now, in this second session, I explain you the exact implementation of EC in our settings, how to fill the logbooks, where I should put the attention, and what is the output of these all sessions. Toward the end, I'll explain about my book review that I put here. Now the students, here this is my book. I just show you through this PPT. This is the book that is going to be published in first week or in second week, tentatively. The dates are not clear, but that is going to be published in February. Now in this book, when I see as a content, the contents are given here in three ways. That is, first part, I explain you the basic need of EC, and second division, I explain different EC settings, and in third, I explain different assessment modules. I try to cover all these three divisions useful for anatomy, physiology, as well as for biochemistry and community medicine. That is, for 4 subjects modules are covered in this textbook. This textbook is helpful to you to learn in detail the basic EC strategy, the syllabus that is covered as per NMC norms, and the syllabus and other aspects are covered as per the NMC norms. In other aspects, we put different domains, different ideas, particularly assessment. We highlighted the assessment facts in this book so that you can learn what is important to you in exam point of view. With these students, here in this book, I tried to cover the EC objectives in detail, EC competencies in detail. I just divided the DC competencies in a tabular formats required for different subjects. In second part of this book, I just put these 3: anatomy, physiology and biochemistry, all the modules, syllabus, components, their objectives in a detailed way. Further, each module, each visit is explained with its all clinical implications. Theoretically, we covered all the aspects. Clinically, we covered. Practically, we covered. But is the learning outcome using these EC sessions? With this, I hope you understand from this 2 session, you get initial clearance of idea of exactly what is EC, how the EC is going to be implemented, and that will make my 2 sessions as smooth to learn the EC in throughout year. With this student, I'll just conclude this part with this my 30-minute speech on implementation of EC as my second session today. Now in third session, we are going to see a very interesting part, that are ethics short films. Students, the importance of these EC short films, in this ethics short films, these are the short films are prepared from our PIMS students of earlier batches. I'll just show you with the explanation of these different videos, different short films that are important in your learning of ITCOM and other CBME different parts with you. Now here, as per the time is 11:30, I just conclude this session at 11:30. There is a break of 10 minutes, and exactly at 11:40 please join for the third very interesting session of short films, how our students prepare the short films on different topics that will motivate you to be prepared. And I hope with this year, this 2020-21 batch will prepare again new one short film, educational short film with interest. I'll just take your feedback with you afterwards. Now I'll stop here at 11:30 and we'll meet exactly at 11:40. Thank you students. Thank you once again. Looking or observing or just watching are prepared by our own students of PIMS. All the first year, second year students prepared, made these short films on different subjects associated with the ethics and CBME. I'll just show you initial two short films, and if time permits we go for the third short films. And the basic purpose or objectives to show you these our own PIMS short films that will motivate you to prepare short film for our MBBS course. Secondly, you will understand a more message from medical community, medical subjects, CBME from each short films. These short films will guide you, help you, to motivate you to prepare a new topic for the next batch. With these students, I'll just show you the first short film. The title is Justice. This short film is basically based on the 4 basic principles of medical bioethics. These 4 principles of medical bioethics are well explained in this short film of Justice as a first short film. I will show you the second short film. The second short film title is Duvida. That is a national prize winning short film. We prepared it at a PMS in 2016 and we get the first national prize for this short film that second short film, that is Duvida. This Duvida short film is based on one very important issue of medical ethics, that is the cesarean section and need of cesarean section in our practice of society as well as in clinical practice. And third short film is One Wrong Move, that is based on ragging issue, that we said this short film as a nominee to the UGC competition that is conducted by the UGC recently. Now with this background, I'll just show you these different short films. Just watch these short films. Surely put your feedback to us afterwards or when you are joining regularly in our subsequent sessions. With this, we just go for the first short film, that is the Justice. I just put you the first short film, Justice. हॅलो
पहिल्यापासून आवाज येतो.
हां
आवाज पहिल्यापासून
हो नाही पहिला आवाज नाही. हां येते जाऊ दे काय ते आपण सांगितलं ना काय जाऊ दे काही आता काय करता येत नाही आपल्याला. आता मावशीनं फक्त भरायला सांगते सगळं पाणी भरून घ्या. आपल्याला पाणी गेलं तर बिल्डिंग पाणी जाईल फक्त. जाऊ दे. हो ओके आला गावात.
क्लॅरिटी केले नाही आहे. अरे जाओ यहाँ से, यहाँ बहुत काम है, बहुत पेशेंट आते जाते रहते हैं।
मैम बहुत प्लीज बहुत धन्यवाद।
तुम आओ, इसको लेके जाओ, बहुत काम है।
ये बाबा जरा साइड में बस।
बहुत दर्द हो रहा है
हाँ ठीक है, नाम बोलो।
मैम पेट में बहुत दर्द हो रहा है।
अरे बोला ना तुम्हें, नाम बोलो।
शांताराम तो के
पैसे हैं कि नहीं तुम्हारे पास?
पैसे पैसे हैं
लेकिन क्या?
लेकिन माता अभी नहीं है।
देखो, ये हॉस्पिटल चैरिटी के लिए नहीं है। अरे जाओ यहाँ से, यहाँ बहुत काम है, बहुत पेशेंट आते जाते रहते हैं।
मैम बहुत प्लीज बहुत धन्यवाद।
तुम आओ, इसको लेके जाओ, बहुत काम है।
ये बाबा जरा साइड में बस।
रीनल ट्रांसप्लांट के बारे में पूछना है। रीनल ट्रांसप्लांट? हाँ, तो तुम्हें पता होगा ये महंगा है। बस मेडिक्लेम तो तुम्हें नहीं पता मेडिक्लेम क्या है? अच्छा रुको, मैं देखती हूँ डॉक्टर फ्री है। सर कोई पेशेंट आया?
अरे यार भेज दो।
सर सर
हाँ?
पेशेंट आया।
यस अरे खड़े रहोगे या रिपोर्ट भी दिखाओगे?
सॉरी सर।
देख लेना। क्या प्रॉब्लम क्या है आपकी?
Actually, doctor has been on dialysis since the last 6 months. मुझे एक्चुअली रीनल ट्रांसप्लांट चाहिए।
हाँ।
मेरी फैमिली डॉक्टर ने आपका नाम सजेस्ट किया था। आई रियली नीड अ ऑर्गन ट्रांसप्लांट राइट नाउ।
मेडिक्लेम तो होगा आपके पास?
नहीं, मेडिक्लेम क्या है?
अरे मेडिक्लेम द हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस।
नहीं है मेरे पास मेडिक्लेम।
तो फिर थोड़ा डिफिकल्ट रहेगा।
डॉक्टर प्लीज डॉक्टर, आप ही एक लास्ट होप हो।
मैन इन योर लोकेलिटी, क्या नाम था उनका?
सर शर्मा जी।
शर्मा जी, हाँ शर्मा जी। शर्मा जी had a renal transplant. Just because he had a mediclaim, it was in a cheaper rate for him.
पर शर्मा जी ने तो नहीं बताया कि उनका रीनल ट्रांसप्लांट हुआ था।
आप वो छोड़ो ना, आप एक काम करो, अपना मेडिक्लेम बना लो और बीच में मैं कुछ टेस्ट देता हूँ, वो टेस्ट करा लो। बाकी चीजें मेरी रिसेप्शनिस्ट आपको बता देगी।
थैंक यू डॉक्टर। कम विद मी प्लीज।
हेलो, हाँ डॉक्टर मिश्रा। हाँ एक पेशेंट भेजा है जी। हाँ बहुत सारे टेस्ट लिख दिए। अरे हाँ कार्ड दो बगैर। और हाँ मुझे ना पिछली बार की तरह चेकिंग नहीं चाहिए कमीशन। हाँ 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 ये पेशेंट है, बाद में बात ठीक है।
Excuse me? Yes,
I think I have an appointment.
yes, I'll just let the doctor know. डॉक्टर
Yes?
आपकी फॉरेन वाली पेशेंट आए।
अरे वाह, भेजो उनको अंदर।
हाँ डॉक्टर।
Oh, hi. Hello.
Hello.
Welcome. Have a seat.
So, as you know, doctor, I needed an organ transplant.
Yes.
My agent must have told you about it.
Yes, yes. He told me about it.
So, this was my case file.
Okay.
Have you found anybody yet?
Actually, ma'am, we are looking into.
डॉक्टर साहब
अरे इसको अरे कॉल हो रहा है। रिसेप्शनिस्ट इसको बाहर भेजेगा।
हाँ सर।
डॉक्टर साहब
सॉरी डॉक्टर।
Is this a poor guy all right?
Yes, ma'am. He is all right. Just wait for a minute. I'll
Sure.
look into it.
Please, please.
Are you-
Go ahead.
क्या प्रॉब्लम है आपकी यहाँ?
सब पेट में बहुत दर्द हो रहा है।
इधर, यहाँ पे? No, it's a case of acute appendicitis. और जल्द से जल्द ऑपरेशन करना पड़ेगा। कम से कम 50,000 का खर्चा है।
50,000?
हाँ।
सब इतने पैसे नहीं है।
अरे तो मेरा टाइम खराब मत करो, निकलो।
इसकी किडनी लेके फॉरेनर को भेज देते हैं और पैसा कमाएंगे।
हाँ, एक काम करो, मैं आपको ऑपरेशन फ्री में कर देता हूँ। आप बस एडमिट हो जाओ। असिस्टेंट, इसका फाइल बनाओ और एडमिट करो। ठीक है? हाँ, जाओ। यस।
एक बात सर्जरी क्यों कर रहे हो?
अरे समझाता हूँ।
क्या? और ये illegal है?
अरे ये चीज़ें बहुत दिनों से चल रही है, अभी नहीं हो यहाँ पे। बहुत पैसा आएगा। I give you bonus. Okay? हाँ, अभी काम पे लोग वापस चलो।
ये प्लान है इनका। I have to inform the police and the media.
Ma'am, I have a good news for you.
Tell me.
Our donor just confirmed his donation, and it will be available very soon.
That's great news. This quickly? You really own up to your name. But all this is legal, right?
Don't take tension about the legal things. I'll manage it. You just pay the advance to my receptionist and fill all the remaining forms, and she'll guide you for further procedure.
Okay, sure.
The hair's coming out.
Sir, the patient is ready for his appendectomy.
No, prep him for the removal of kidney.
But sir, he came in with the case of appendicitis.
Yeah, but we are going to remove his kidney and give it to the foreign. So prep him for the kidney removal.
But sir, we don't have his consent.
Don't ask silly questions. Just do whatever is told, okay? Senior से ज़बान मत लड़ाओ. हाँ, जाओ.
डॉक्टर पुलिस और मीडिया बाहर है।
What? No one knew about it. Did you tell them?
अरे मैं क्या अपने पेट पे लात मारूंगी?
तो फिर कैसे?
Doctor, you are under arrest.
We've caught you red-handed.
ऐसे कैसे बोल सकते हो आप लोग? What's the proof? Huh?
I have the proof. I have the entire recording of you and your receptionist. You are found guilty for selling a poor man's kidney to a foreigner for monetary gains. How could you do this? The tests, the mediclaim, were they even necessary? They were just to extort money out of me. आप किसी की जिंदगी से ऐसा कैसे खेल सकते हो? You are surely going to pay for this. This is reporter Snehal with cameraman Jenny from PMT News and live telecast.
Every patient do have a right to equal treatment.
Every common man should stand against injustice. Being a part of medical profession, I will not discriminate between patients based on their socio-economic status.
The 4 basic principles of bioethics must be followed in all treatments.
Every patient should be treated equally. Unnecessary prescription should not be prescribed, and medical policies should not be flawed for financial reasons.
A patient should not be treated without his or her consent.
The law is not an exception for medical practitioners.
So, let's join our hands and fight against injustice
Equality.
and stand for autonomy.
Beneficence.
Non-maleficence.
And justice.
आप इस गीता पे हाथ रख के कसम खाइए कि आप जो भी कहेंगे सच कहेंगे और सच के सिवाय कुछ नहीं कहेंगे।
मैं गीता पे हाथ रख के कहता हूँ कि मैं जो कहूँगा सच कहूँगा और सच के सिवा और कुछ नहीं कहूँगा।
डॉक्टर साहब, एडमिट होने से पहले आपके और पेशेंट की जो बातें हुई थी वो आप कोर्ट को बताइए।
माय लॉर्ड, उस दिन हुआ यूं कि मैं एज यूजुअल अपने क्लिनिक में बैठा था जब मिस्टर और मिसेस वर्मा मेरे क्लिनिक में आए।
अरे आइए वर्मा जी, आइए बैठिए।
डॉक्टर वो रिपोर्ट्स आ रही हैं।
क्या बात है? अरे आपके रिपोर्ट्स के हिसाब से तो आपको कोई भी तकलीफ नहीं है, एचबी की कोई तकलीफ नहीं है, बीपी भी वो नॉर्मल है, डायबिटीज की कोई तकलीफ नहीं है और बच्चे की पोजीशन भी काफी नॉर्मल है। और आपकी ईडीडी के हिसाब से आपकी 3 दिन बाद की डेट है, तो 1 दिन पहले एडमिट हो जाइए। और मिसेस वर्मा, अगर आपको कोई तकलीफ हो, पेन्स हो, तो इमीडिएटली एडमिट होइए।
डॉक्टर साहब, मेरे और मेरी बीवी की ये राय है कि हम नॉर्मल डिलीवरी का जो ऑपरेशन कराना चाहते हैं, क्योंकि हम हमारा बच्चा कल ही चाहते हैं। गुरुजी के हिसाब से कल के सूर्योदय का मुहूर्त अति शुभ है।
पर क्यों? सब कुछ तो नॉर्मल है, फिर भी आप क्यों चाहते हैं?
डॉक्टर, मेरी मानसिक स्थिति नहीं है नॉर्मल डिलीवरी करवाने की। मैं इतना दर्द नहीं सह पाऊंगी और हमारे गुरुजी ने भी कहा है कि कल का मुहूर्त सबसे शुभ है।
देखिए मिसेस वर्मा, ऐसा नहीं कि नॉर्मल डिलीवरी में कॉम्प्लिकेशंस नहीं होती, पर सिजेरियन में भी कॉम्प्लिकेशंस हो सकती है, क्योंकि सिजेरियन में एनेस्थीसिया देना पड़ता है, तो उससे जुड़ी कॉम्प्लिकेशंस हो सकती है। जैसे एनेस्थीसिया के कारण आपको शॉक हो सकता है, थ्रोम्बोएम्बोलिज्म हो सकता है, एमनियोटिक फ्लूइड एम्बोलिज्म हो सकता है, अटोनिक पीपीएच भी हो सकता है। और अगर वो अटोनिक पीपीएच कंट्रोल ना हो तो आप डीआईसी में लैंड हो सकती हो और उसके कारण आपकी मौत भी हो सकती है। और फिर बाद में ऑपरेशन के बाद अगर आपने जख्म का ध्यान न रखा तो आपको सेप्सिस भी हो सकता है। तो इतनी सारी कॉम्प्लिकेशंस के बावजूद क्या आप फिर भी ऑपरेशन कराना चाहती है?
हाँ डॉक्टर, हमें सिजेरियन ही करवाना है।
ठीक है नर्स, इनसे एलएसएस का फॉर्म, कंसेंट फॉर्म भरा लीजिए और इन्हें एडमिट कीजिए।
चलो
ठीक है।
ये लीजिए फॉर्म, इसे पढ़ लीजिए और यहाँ आखिर में साइन कर दीजिए। अरे, आपके तो सारे रिपोर्ट्स नॉर्मल हैं, फिर भी आप ऑपरेशन करवाना चाहती हैं?
वो क्या है ना कि मैंने सुना है नॉर्मल डिलीवरी में शरीर की सारी हड्डियाँ टूटे, इतना दर्द होता है और मैं इतना दर्द नहीं सह सकती।
सच कहा, पर इतनी सहन शक्ति भगवान ने हर माँ को दी है। आप अपने बच्चे के लिए इतना भी नहीं कर सकती? नॉर्मल डिलीवरी में कोई खतरा नहीं है और सी सेक्शन में कॉम्प्लिकेशंस आ गए तो साइन किया। सी सेक्शंस में कॉम्प्लिकेशंस आ गए तो आप अपने बच्चे के लिए इतना कर नहीं सकती? सी सेक्शंस में कॉम्प्लिकेशंस आ गए तो आप अपने बच्चे के लिए इतना नहीं कर सकती?
इससे बिल्कुल भी वहाँ पे गए थे ना?
अभी पीडियाट्रिशियन का चेकअप है।
डॉक्टर देखिए, जैसे मैंने कहा था ना कि ऑपरेशन नहीं कराना चाहिए था, मैं बहुत खुश हूँ डॉक्टर।
और कुछ बातें ऐसी होती है कि हम भी कुछ नहीं कर सकते। हमने आखिरी मौके तक ट्राई किया और हम बच्चे की माँ को नहीं बचा सकते।
अनुसार हर औरत को अपने शरीर पर पूरा हक होता है और इस हक के कारण वो किसी भी प्रक्रिया के लिए हाँ या ना कर सकती है। कानूनी तौर पर डॉक्टर का फर्ज है कि वो किसी भी प्रक्रिया से संबंधित हर समस्या के बारे में पेशेंट को आगाह करे, साथ ही उसकी लिखित रूप में अनुमति दे। मेरे क्लाइंट डॉक्टर चोपड़ा ने ये सारी फॉर्मेलिटीज पूरी की है। सबूत के तौर पर कोर्ट में ओरिजिनल कंसेंट फॉर्म पेश किया गया है और पीएम रिपोर्ट्स के अनुसार मिसेस वर्मा का देहांत सिजेरियन सेक्शन में आई ब्लीडिंग कॉम्प्लिकेशंस के कारण ही हुआ।
हम लोग समाज में जब कुछ समस्या होती है तो विशेषज्ञ के पास जाते हैं। रोग के केस में भी हम लोग डॉक्टर्स के पास जाते हैं और डॉक्टर्स जो जिंदगी भर यानी कहिए लंबे काल तक अध्ययन और अनुभव के द्वारा जो महारत प्राप्त करते हैं उसके आधार पर मरीजों का ट्रीटमेंट करते हैं, मरीजों का इलाज करते हैं। अपनी सेवा शुश्रूषा में वो कोई कसर नहीं छोड़ते। ऐसे केस में जब कभी किसी मरीज के साथ में कुछ दुर्घटना या कुछ गलत आउटकम होता है तो ऐसे में डॉक्टर को दोषी ठहराना कहाँ तक उचित है। कहा जाता है कि जिंदगी और मौत ऊपर वाले के हाथ में है। अगर जिंदगी और मौत ऊपर वाले के हाथ में है तो यहाँ हमें सोचना पड़ेगा कि डॉक्टर को कहाँ तक दोषी ठहराया जाए।
लेक्चर्स तो होते रहेंगे मैडम, पहले इंट्रो ले लेते हैं आपका।
क्या मैडम आइए ना, इंट्रोडक्शन।
ओ मैडम आइए ना, घबराइए मत।
ओ मैडम इंट्रो इतने ही बोले हम। अरे
प्रिंसेस गिर गई।
अरे उठो उठो, कॉलेज का रास्ता पता है कहाँ है? यहाँ से सीधा 100 मीटर आगे जाके लेफ्ट है ना, संभाल के जाना।
रास्ते में पत्थर बहुत है ना रनीसा? नाश्ता तो किया ही होगा और अभी डिसेक्शन हॉल में भी तो जाना होगा। वहाँ चक्कर खा के कहीं गिर मत जाना।
पेपर उठाएंगे मैडम?
उठाएंगी नहीं, उठाना पड़ेगा। महीना टाइम है, ठीक है? वैसे मुझे एक बात बताओ, अभी कितने बज रहे हैं? देख, आजकल के जूनियर्स को टाइम बताने भी नहीं आता। 9:30 हो रहे हैं, 9:30। ये रैगिंग नहीं है, इंट्रो है, इंट्रो। चल जाएंगे।
होता है ये मेरे साथ? मैं ही क्यों? मैंने ऐसा क्या बिगाड़ा है कि मुझे ऐसा टॉर्चर हर रोज सहना पड़ता है? तंग आ गई हूँ इस टॉर्चर से। कितनी मेहनत से इस कॉलेज में एडमिशन मिला था, कितनी उम्मीदें लेकर मैं आई थी। मम्मी पापा का भी सपना था कि मैं एक कामयाब डॉक्टर बनूं। पर क्या यही कॉलेज लाइफ है?
जरा देखो तो कौन आया है। मैडम जी, चलो तो। ओहो मैडम जी, इतनी क्या पढ़ाई कर रही हो? कौन सा डिस्टिंक्शन मारना है? पहले इंट्रो तो दे दो। हाँ मैडम, इंट्रो जरा डिटेल में देना।
गाइस ऑलरेडी बहुत वार्निंग आ चुकी है, छोड़ो यार।
क्यों बे, तेरी क्या लगती है वो? रैगिंग इज अ पार्ट ऑफ कॉलेज लाइफ।
और हम तो तुम्हारे सीनियर है, जो हम बोलते हैं वो करो।
अरे काय चाललंय इथं? काय? चला बाहेर चला, चला.
One last wish. Those who are responsible for my death know it themselves. If they realize their mistake, it is enough. If they never trouble anyone like they trouble me, it is enough.
It wasn't anything serious. It was something you did for fun. Was nothing I was supposed to cry over. For you, it was full of fun. You thought I wasn't strong. It was you who made me weak. You thought I chose to be silent. It was you who didn't let me speak. You know who is guilty. It isn't something I need to prove. You robbed me of my confidence, inched me towards this wrong move. You denied me the respect that I truly deserved. You shattered all my dreams. In my grave they will be preserved.
Hello students, you enjoyed these 3 short films that today we watch during these sessions. I hope you get motivated, you get the idea of preparing short films on medical issues. With this, I conclude this today's session, that is videos or medical ethics. With this, I conclude this session. Thank you students for watching these videos and conducting and just listening this session. EC in morning, EC implementation, that was second session, and videos as a third session. Thank you students and have a good day. Thank you.